Some choices change everything. On Christmas morning in the Wyoming Territory, mountain man Caleb Stone finds two little girls barefoot and freezing in the snow outside his ranch. The twin sisters are abandoned, shivering, and too scared to speak. In a frontier town where everyone struggles to survive, no one wants the burden of two more children. Caleb could ride into town and leave them at the church. He could walk away, but when he looks into their frightened eyes, he sees something that breaks his heart. He wraps them in his coat and carries them inside his cabin. This one act of mercy will reveal a secret that connects their lives in ways none of them could imagine. What made someone abandon two children on the coldest day of the year? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin sat alone in a clearing, surrounded by towering pines weighted down with fresh snow. Smoke rose from the stone chimney in a steady grey column against the white sky. Inside, Caleb Stone stood at the window with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands, watching the world outside turn silent and still under the Christmas morning snowfall. He was a man carved from the same mountains that surrounded him. 42 years old, with a face weathered by wind and sun, hands scarred from decades of work, and eyes that held the kind of weariness that comes from seeing too much loss. His dark hair, streaked with grey at the temples, hung past his collar. A thick beard covered his jaw, more practical than decorative in this climate. He stood well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered and lean, the kind of build that came from survival rather than vanity. The cabin reflected its owner, functional, sparse, built to last. One large room served as kitchen, living space, and workshop. A sleeping loft occupied the space above, reached by a sturdy ladder. The furniture was handmade: a table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies and tools. Furs and hides hung from the walls, both for insulation and inventory. Traps and rifles stood in the corner. A fire burned in the stone hearth, the only sound besides the wind outside and the occasional pop of settling logs. Caleb had built this place 5 years ago with his own hands, every log cut and notched, every stone for the chimney hauled from the creek bed a mile distant. He had built it to last forever and to hold absolutely nothing that mattered. On the table beside him lay a worn leather Bible, its cover cracked and faded, Sarah's Bible. His wife had carried it from Pennsylvania when they married, had read from it every night before bed, had pressed flowers between its pages. Caleb hadn't opened it in 5 years, but he took it out every Christmas morning and set it on the table. He never read it. He just needed to see it there, a reminder of what once was. Sarah had been dead 5 years this February. Their daughter, Mary, had died 3 days before her mother, both taken by fever in the span of one terrible week. Caleb had been helpless to save either of them. He had held Sarah's hand as she slipped away, had listened to her final words. "Don't let the grief destroy you. Promise me you'll keep living." He had kept his body alive. Whether his soul had survived was another question entirely. After burying them in the cemetery in Redemption Ridge, Caleb had sold their small ranch, packed what he could carry, and ridden into the mountains. He became what Sarah would have hated, a man who chose isolation over community, silence over connection, survival over living. He trapped beaver and fox, traded pelts in town twice a year, spoke to no one unless necessary, and returned to his cabin as quickly as possible. The mountains suited him. They asked nothing, judged nothing, expected nothing. They simply existed, ancient and indifferent. He could disappear into them, and the world would never notice his absence. Most days, that suited him just fine. But Christmas had a way of making him remember, making him feel, making him wonder if Sarah had been right, if the grief had in fact destroyed the man he used to be, leaving only this hollow shell going through the motions of existence. He picked up the Bible, running his thumb across the cover. Sarah had been everything good in his life, kind, patient, faithful. She had seen something in him worth loving, had believed he could be better than the rough-edged ranch hand she met at a church social. She had civilized him, softened him, given him purpose beyond mere survival. When she died, that purpose died with her. Caleb set the Bible back down and turned toward the fire. The coffee in his cup had gone cold. He dumped it in the basin and considered making more, but the thought felt like too much effort. Instead, he pulled on his heavy coat, wrapped a scarf around his neck, and stepped outside to check the animals. The cold hit him like a fist, sharp and clean. Snow fell in thick, lazy flakes, already accumulating on the ground. His breath came out in white clouds. The world was absolutely silent, the kind of deep, muffled quiet that only came with heavy snow. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it reminded him of the silence in the house after Sarah died. His horse, a sturdy buckskin named Flint, stood in the lean-to shelter he had built against the cabin's north wall. Caleb checked the animal's water, broke the thin layer of ice that had formed, and forked hay into the feeder. Flint nickered softly, his breath steaming in the cold air. "Merry Christmas, old friend," Caleb said quietly. The horse was the only living thing he spoke to regularly. "Looks like we're in for a few days of this." The chickens huddled in their coop, fluffed against the cold. He scattered feed, collected 3 eggs, and secured the door against predators. Everything was as it should be, secure, isolated, safe. As he turned back toward the cabin, a sound stopped him. It was faint, almost lost in the whisper of falling snow. A whimper, or maybe a cry. He stood perfectly still, listening. The wind shifted, and he heard it again. Definitely a cry, a child's cry. Caleb's heart began to pound. No one lived within 5 miles of his cabin. No one had any reason to be out here, especially not in this weather, especially not on Christmas morning. He moved toward the sound, his boots crunching through the snow. It was coming from the front of the cabin, near the narrow trail that served as a road. As he rounded the corner, he saw them. 2 small figures huddled against the split rail fence that marked the edge of his property. Children, little girls, identical in size and features, twins. They wore only thin nightgowns, no coats, no shoes. Their bare feet were blue with cold. They clung to each other, shaking violently, one of them crying weakly, while the other simply stared ahead with glassy, unfocused eyes. For a moment, Caleb couldn't move, couldn't process what he was seeing. Children, abandoned, freezing. Then training and instinct took over. He rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside them. Hey now, he said, his voice rough from disuse. "I've got you. You're safe now." The crying girl, the one still conscious enough to cry, looked up at him with enormous blue eyes filled with terror and desperate hope. The other girl didn't respond at all. Her lips were turning blue. Caleb didn't hesitate. He shed his heavy coat and wrapped it around both girls, lifting them together in his arms. They weighed almost nothing, fragile as birds. He stood and turned back toward the cabin, moving as quickly as he dared through the snow. "Hold on," he told them. "Just hold on. I'm going to get you warm." The conscious girl pressed her face against his chest. Her sister's head lolled against his shoulder. Caleb's mind raced. Frostbite, hypothermia. He had seen both before, knew how quickly cold could kill. He had minutes, not hours. He kicked open the cabin door and carried them straight to the fire, setting them down gently on the thick bearskin rug that covered the floor in front of the hearth. Their skin was ice-cold to the touch, their breathing shallow and rapid. Caleb's hands moved with practiced efficiency, years of frontier living taking over. He had treated frostbite before, knew the dangers of warming frozen flesh too quickly. He grabbed blankets from the loft, wrapped the girls carefully, then filled his kettle with lukewarm water and set it on the edge of the fire to heat gradually. The conscious girl watched him with those enormous eyes. Still too terrified or too cold to speak, her sister remained frighteningly still. "What are your names?" Caleb asked gently as he worked, trying to keep them engaged. keep them present. Can you tell me your names? The girl's lips moved, but no sound came out. She tried again. Emma, she finally whispered. My sister is Lily. Emma and Lily, Caleb repeated. Those are beautiful names. I'm Caleb. You're safe here, Emma. I promise you're safe. He tested the water temperature, then began the careful process of warming their frozen feet, moving slowly, watching for signs of pain or further injury. Emma whimpered. Lily still didn't respond. As he worked, a cold fury began to build in Caleb's chest. Someone had done this. Someone had left two small children outside in a blizzard to die. On Christmas morning, what kind of person abandoned children in the snow? And why had they left them here, at his cabin, miles from anywhere? Emma's hand suddenly gripped his wrist with surprising strength. Don't leave us, she whispered. Please don't leave us too. Caleb looked into her frightened face and felt something crack open inside his chest, something he had thought was sealed shut forever. These children had been left to die, cast out, abandoned by people who should have protected them. Just like Sarah and Mary had been taken from him, these girls had been taken from whoever loved them, or worse, whoever should have loved them. He covered Emma's small hand with his own. I'm not going anywhere, he said quietly. And neither are you. Not until we figure out what happened and get you both well again. Emma's eyes filled with tears. She nodded once, then pressed close to her unconscious sister, as if her nearness alone could keep Lily anchored to this world. Caleb returned his attention to the work at hand, but his mind churned with questions. Who were these children? Where had they come from? Who would do such a monstrous thing? Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the tracks that might have given him answers. Inside, two small lives hung in the balance, and Caleb Stone, who had chosen solitude and silence and the slow death of isolation, found himself suddenly, desperately needed. Some choices change everything. This one already had. The first hour was critical. Caleb had learned that truth the hard way, watching helpless as fever took his daughter, despite every desperate measure. Cold was different than fever, but just as unforgiving. Minutes mattered. Seconds mattered. He worked methodically, fighting the urge to rush. Lily remained unconscious, her breathing so shallow he had to put his hand near her mouth to feel it. Emma stayed awake but quiet, watching him with those frightened blue eyes that seemed to look straight through to his soul. The water in the kettle reached the right temperature, warm, but not hot. Too much heat too fast would damage frozen tissue beyond repair. He soaked strips of cloth and wrapped them around the girl's feet, changing them every few minutes as they absorbed the cold from their skin. Slowly, carefully, bringing life back to frozen flesh. Emma whimpered when feeling began to return to her feet. The pain was a good sign. It meant the tissue was still viable, still capable of healing. Lily didn't respond at all, and that worried him more than he wanted to admit. Talk to me, Emma, Caleb said quietly as he worked. Can you tell me what happened? How did you end up outside my cabin? Emma's small body shook, and not just from the cold. The man said we had to go, said we couldn't stay no more. What man? Mr. Henderson, he said. Her voice broke. He said we was cursed, said bad things happen to people who keep us. Caleb's jaw tightened. Henderson. He knew that name. A farmer who lived on the outskirts of Redemption Ridge, a man who attended church every Sunday and spoke loudly about Christian duty while being quick to judge anyone who fell short of his standards. Did Mr. Henderson bring you here? Caleb asked. Emma shook her head. He put us in his wagon, drove us somewhere, said to get out and walk, said God would provide if we was meant to live. Tears spilled down her cheeks. We walked and walked. It was so dark and so cold. Lily fell down and couldn't get up no more. Then I saw the light from your window. Caleb closed his eyes briefly, fighting back rage. Henderson had driven these children out into the wilderness in the middle of the night, in a blizzard, and told them to walk. Left them to die, and called it God's will. Your sister's going to be all right, he said, though he wasn't certain of that at all. But I need you to stay awake for me, Emma. Can you do that? Stay awake and keep talking? Emma nodded. Her hand moved to her sister's, gripping it tightly. As she did, something fell from her palm, a scrap of red ribbon, worn and faded, the edges frayed from handling. Caleb picked it up. What's this? Mama's ribbon, Emma whispered. She gave it to us before she went to heaven. Said it would keep us safe. Said as long as we held it, we'd find someone who would help us. The ribbon felt fragile in his rough hands, as delicate as the children themselves. A mother's final gift to her daughters, a thread of hope in a cold and unforgiving world. Your mother was right, Caleb said quietly. You found help. You found me. He set the ribbon carefully on the table and returned to his work. Lily's colour was beginning to improve, slightly less grey, more pale pink. Her breathing remained shallow, but seemed to be strengthening. He tucked the blankets more tightly around both girls and added another log to the fire. The cabin was growing almost too warm, but that was necessary. Hypothermia reversed slowly. The body needed time to restore its core temperature without shocking the system. Caleb prepared warm broth from dried meat and vegetables, diluting it with water until it was barely more than flavored liquid. Emma managed a few spoonfuls. He tilted Lily's head back and carefully dripped small amounts between her lips, watching to make sure she swallowed reflexively. She did, which was another good sign. As the afternoon wore on, Lily began to stir. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. She saw her sister and immediately reached for her. Emma hugged her close, crying with relief. "It's all right," Caleb said gently. "You're safe now, Lily. Both of you are safe." Lily looked at him with those same blue eyes, identical to Emma's, filled with the kind of wariness that no 6-year-old should possess. She didn't speak, just watched him as if trying to determine whether he was a threat or a refuge. "He's nice," Emma told her sister. "He saved us. His name is Mr. Caleb." "Just Caleb," he corrected quietly. "No need for Mr." Lily continued to stare at him, then looked around the cabin with growing confusion and fear. "Where are we? Where's Mr. Henderson?" "You're at my cabin, up in the mountains," Caleb said. "Mr. Henderson isn't here. It's just the three of us." "Is he coming back?" Fear filled Lily's face. "Is he going to take us away again?" "No one is taking you anywhere," Caleb said firmly. "Not in this weather. Not until you're both well. And not until I understand what happened." The girls looked at each other in a way that spoke of shared experiences, shared terrors. They had learned not to trust adults, learned that safety was temporary, that kindness could be revoked, that they were burdens no one wanted to carry. Caleb recognized that look. He had seen it in the eyes of wounded animals, that desperate calculation between the fear of humans and the need for help. These children had been treated like animals, cast out when they became inconvenient. "I need to check your feet," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady. "The frostbite needs attention, or you could lose toes. It might hurt, but I'll be as gentle as I can." Both girls nodded, though Lily clung to Emma's hand as if it were the only solid thing in a shifting world. Caleb unwrapped the cloths and examined their feet carefully. The damage wasn't as severe as he had feared, but it wasn't minor either. Several toes on both girls showed the white, waxy appearance of deep frostbite. Those might still be saved with proper care, but it would take time and pain. The process of thawing frozen tissue was excruciating. He re-wrapped their feet with fresh, warm cloths and gave them each a small piece of dried apple to chew. They ate slowly, as if uncertain whether the food might be taken away. That small gesture told him more about their recent lives than any words could have. "How long were you with Mr. Henderson?" he asked. Emma answered, her voice barely above a whisper. 4 days. Before that, we was with Mrs. Sullivan for a week. Before that, the Martins for 5 days. Caleb frowned. "You've been moving from house to house?" "Since Mama died," Emma said. Nobody wants to keep us. They say we're too much trouble. They say bad luck follows us." "That's not true," Caleb said sharply, then softened his tone. "Bad luck doesn't follow children. Only bad people who won't do their duty to care for those who need help." Lily spoke for the first time since waking, her voice raspy from the cold. "Are you going to keep us?" The question hung in the air between them. Caleb looked at these two small girls, wrapped in blankets too large for them, bearing scars both visible and invisible. They had been abandoned by their mother through death, and abandoned again by everyone who should have stepped up to care for them. They had learned that adults couldn't be trusted, that homes were temporary, that survival meant expecting nothing and hoping for less. He thought of Sarah, of what she would say if she could see him now. She had always believed in taking in strays, injured animals, struggling neighbors, anyone who needed help. She would have already told these girls they could stay forever. She wouldn't have hesitated. But Sarah wasn't here. And Caleb had spent 5 years deliberately avoiding any attachment, any responsibility, any possibility of loss. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I live alone for a reason. I'm not good with people anymore, especially not children." Emma's face fell. Lily looked away, and Caleb saw her jaw tighten in a way that made her seem much older than 6. "But," he continued, "you're here now. You're hurt. There's a blizzard outside that's going to last at least 2 more days, maybe 3. So for now, yes, you're staying. We'll figure out the rest later." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even a real commitment. But it was something, and he saw the smallest flicker of hope return to Emma's eyes. "Can we really stay?" Emma asked. "You won't put us out in the cold again?" "Not in this weather," Caleb said. "That much I can promise." Lily looked at him directly for the first time, those blue eyes searching his face. "You promise?" Something about the way she said it, the desperate need for a promise in a world that had broken every promise ever made to her, struck Caleb deep in his chest. He remembered making promises to Mary that she would get better, that the fever would break, that everything would be all right. He had broken every one of those promises, even though he tried his hardest to keep them. He had sworn never to make promises he couldn't keep again. But looking at Lily's face, he couldn't bring himself to refuse her this small thing. "I promise," he said quietly. "While this storm lasts, you're safe here." Lily nodded slowly, then leaned against Emma. Both girls' eyes were growing heavy. The warmth of the cabin, the food in their stomachs, the simple fact that they weren't fighting for their lives anymore, all of it was catching up with them. "Sleep," Caleb said. "I'll keep the fire going. I'll watch over you." "Will you be here when we wake up?" Emma asked, already half asleep. "I'll be here." "Promise?" He hesitated only a moment. "Promise." Within minutes, both girls were asleep, curled together under the blankets, like 2 halves of the same being. Caleb sat in his chair by the fire, watching them breathe, watching the color gradually return to their cheeks. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving the snow horizontal against the windows. The storm was intensifying. They would be trapped here together for days at least, maybe longer. Caleb picked up the red ribbon from the table, turning it over in his hands. A mother's gift, a promise of protection. The woman who had given this to her daughters was dead now, and her children had been cast out like refuse. What kind of world did that? What kind of people? He looked at the girls sleeping by his fire and felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years, the stirring of purpose, of protective fury, of the need to stand between the innocent and the cruelty of the world. He didn't want this, didn't want to care, didn't want to risk his heart again. But sitting here, watching these 2 small lives he had pulled back from the edge of death, Caleb realized he didn't have a choice. Not really. Not if he wanted to remain the kind of man Sarah had believed him to be. The storm raged outside. Inside, 3 people who had been alone now shared a small space of warmth and fragile safety. Tomorrow would bring questions. The day after, decisions. But tonight, Caleb Stone kept his promise. He stayed awake, kept the fire burning, and watched over two small girls who had been abandoned by the world. Some choices change everything. This one already had, whether he was ready for it or not. The 8-mile journey to Redemption Ridge took most of the morning. The trail was treacherous with fresh snow, and Caleb had to lead Flint carefully, testing the path before allowing the horse to pull the sled, carrying the girls. They sat huddled together under blankets, watching the forest pass with wide eyes. Neither girl had spoken much since they left the cabin. The closer they got to town, the more withdrawn they became, as if the settlement itself held bad memories they wanted to avoid. "You're safe," Caleb reminded them more than once. "Nobody's going to hurt you, I promise." Emma nodded each time, but her hand never left Lily's. They drew strength from each other in a way that made Caleb ache. They were all each other had in a world that had rejected them repeatedly. Redemption Ridge appeared gradually through the trees, first the outlying farms, then the main street with its collection of weathered buildings. The town had maybe 300 people, enough to support a general store, a blacksmith, a church, a saloon, and a handful of other businesses. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, for better or worse. Mostly worse, in Caleb's experience. He hadn't been to town since late summer, nearly 6 months ago. He noticed people stopping to stare as he drove the sled down Main Street. A few recognized him and nodded. Most just watched with curiosity. When they saw the two small girls on the sled, the whispers started. Caleb ignored them. He had a destination in mind, the sheriff's office. Sheriff Tom Hastings was an old acquaintance, one of the few men in town Caleb still respected. They had served together briefly during the war, and Tom had always been a man who valued justice over convenience. If anyone would give straight answers, it would be Tom. Caleb pulled the sled up in front of the small building that served as both sheriff's office and jail. He helped the girls down, and they clung to his coat as he led them inside. Tom looked up from his desk, and his weathered face registered surprise, then concern. "Caleb Stone, didn't expect to see you until spring." "Tom," Caleb said with a nod, "we need to talk." The sheriff's eyes moved to the girls, and something flickered across his face, recognition mixed with discomfort. "That's Emma and Lily Henderson, or they were. I heard—" He stopped himself, glancing at the girls. "Where did you find them?" "Outside my cabin on Christmas morning," Caleb said flatly. "Barefoot in the snow, nearly frozen to death." Tom's face darkened. He stood slowly, his hand moving to rest on his gun belt, not threateningly, but as if steadying himself. "Jacob Henderson said they ran off, said he couldn't control them, and they disappeared into the night." "Jacob Henderson is a liar," Caleb said, his voice cold and level. "These girls told me he put them in his wagon, drove them into the wilderness, and told them to walk. Left them to die, and called it God's will." The sheriff was quiet for a long moment. Finally he said, "Can you prove it?" "Their testimony won't hold up against a property owner and church elder," Tom interrupted. "Not in this town, not for those girls." Caleb felt his anger rising. Tom sighed and gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. "Sit down, Caleb. This is a longer story than you probably realize." Caleb helped the girls into chairs, then remained standing himself. "Then tell me. Start with Margaret. Who was she? Where did she come from?" Tom settled back into his own chair, his expression troubled. "Margaret showed up here about 7 years ago. She was pregnant, alone, and wouldn't say much about her past. Said the father of her babies was dead, and she was looking for a fresh start. Why here? Why Redemption Ridge? She said she had heard of someone in the area who might help her. Never said who. Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house took her in, gave her a room in exchange for sewing work. Margaret was talented with a needle. She made a living doing alterations and making clothes for folks. And the town's opinion of her?" Tom's jaw tightened. "Not charitable. She was an unwed mother, which was bad enough. But she also refused to repent for it, refused to call her situation a sin, said she had loved the father truly, and wouldn't apologize for that love, even if society didn't approve. So they ostracized her. Pastor Mitchell tried to be kind, Tom said. Mrs. Peterson defended her. But most folks, especially the women, wanted nothing to do with her, called her a Jezebel, said she was a bad influence. He looked at the girls, said her daughters would grow up to be the same. Emma's face had gone pale. Lily stared at the floor. They had heard versions of this before, Caleb realized. The poison had been dripped into their ears their whole lives. She died 2 months ago, Caleb said. Tell me what happened. Fever, Tom said simply. Hit her hard and fast. She was gone in 3 days. Before she died, she asked Mrs. Peterson to find good homes for the girls. Mrs. Peterson tried. God knows she tried. But nobody wanted them. So they were passed around like unwanted goods. More or less, Tom admitted, shame coloring his voice. The Sullivan family took them first, but said they couldn't manage. The Martins next, same result. Then Henderson agreed to take them, said it was his Christian duty. The sheriff's face hardened. I should have known better. Henderson talks a good talk about duty and righteousness, but he's a hard man with a mean streak. He tried to kill them, Caleb said flatly. Like I said, I can't prove that, and Henderson has friends on the town council. If you accuse him publicly— I'm not here to accuse, Caleb interrupted. I'm here for information. Did Margaret ever talk about the girl's father? Ever mention a name? Tom shook his head. She kept that close. All she ever said was that he was a good man who made a mistake and died for it. Why? Caleb pulled out the photograph and set it on Tom's desk. Look at this. Look at her face. The sheriff studied the image, then looked up at Caleb with dawning understanding. She looks like Sarah, like your wife Sarah. More than looks like her, Caleb said. They could have been sisters, but Sarah didn't have any sisters. You told me her family was all gone. They were, Caleb confirmed. That's what I thought anyway. But what if I was wrong? What if Sarah had family she didn't know about? Or what if— He paused, considering another possibility. What if this isn't about Sarah at all? What if it's about my family? Tom frowned. Your brother James? James died in the war. That's what we were told. His body was never recovered, but witnesses said they saw him fall. Caleb's voice grew harder. But what if he didn't die? What if he survived and was too ashamed to come home? Ashamed of what? Of deserting? Of running from the war? Caleb looked at the girls. Emma, Lily, did your mama ever mention your papa's name? Ever once? Emma shook her head. She said it didn't matter. Said names were just words, and what mattered was that he loved us, even though he never got to meet us. Tom leaned forward. Caleb, what are you thinking? I'm thinking Margaret knew about me. The girls said she told them about a man in the mountains who would help them if they needed it. She sent them to me specifically. Tom, why would she do that unless there was a connection? You think James might be the father? I think it's possible, Caleb said. The timing works. Margaret showed up here 7 years ago, pregnant. James, supposedly, died 10 years ago. If he survived and went into hiding, if he met Margaret somewhere— He stopped, the weight of it hitting him. If these girls are James's daughters, they're my nieces. They're family. The sheriff sat back, processing this. That's a hell of a theory based on a resemblance and timing. It's more than that, Caleb insisted. It's instinct. When I look at these girls, I see James. I see his eyes, his stubborn chin. I didn't recognize it at first because I wasn't looking for it. But now— He paused. I need to know the truth, Tom. I need to find out if Margaret left anything behind. Any letters, any documents, anything that might prove the connection. Tom nodded slowly. Mrs. Peterson might have Margaret's belongings. She kept the room after Margaret died, said she'd hold on to things in case the girls ever needed them. Then that's where we're going. Caleb moved toward the door, but Tom's voice stopped him. Caleb, even if you prove they're your nieces— That doesn't solve your problem with Henderson. He still has influence. If he wants to make trouble, let him try, Caleb said coldly. If these girls are my blood, then they're my responsibility, and I don't give up what's mine. He helped Emma and Lily out of the office and back onto the sled. As they prepared to leave, Tom came to the door. "Caleb," he called, "for what it's worth, I'm glad you found them. They deserve better than what this town gave them." Caleb nodded once, then guided Flint toward the boarding house. Behind him, he could feel the weight of the sheriff's gaze, and beyond that, the collective stare of the town itself. Let them look, he thought. Let them wonder. Soon enough, they would all know the truth. And then he would make certain these girls never had to beg for acceptance again. Mrs. Peterson's boarding house stood at the edge of town, a two-story structure that had seen better days but was maintained with fierce pride. The elderly woman who ran it had a reputation for taking in strays, human and otherwise, and asking few questions about their pasts. She opened the door before Caleb could knock, her sharp eyes taking in him, and the girls in one assessing glance. "Caleb Stone, heard you were in town, heard you brought company." "News travels fast," Caleb said. "Always does." Mrs. Peterson's gaze softened as it fell on Emma and Lily. "Hello, little ones. I've missed you." Both girls rushed forward, hugging the old woman with an enthusiasm they hadn't shown toward anyone except each other. "Mrs. Peterson," Emma cried. "We thought we'd never see you again." "Hush now," the woman said, but Caleb could hear the emotion in her voice. "Come inside, all of you. It's too cold to stand on the porch talking." The boarding house interior was warm and cluttered, the comfortable clutter of a place that served as home to many. Mrs. Peterson led them to her private sitting room and insisted on making tea while the girls settled onto a worn but comfortable sofa. "I heard what Henderson did," she said without preamble as she poured. "I would have taken the girls myself, but I'm too old and too poor. They said the girls needed a proper family. Proper meaning rich and respected," Caleb said dryly. "Exactly that." Mrs. Peterson handed him a cup. "So what brings you here, Mr. Stone, other than the obvious?" "I need to know about Margaret," Caleb said. "Everything you can tell me. And I need to see if she left anything behind, letters, documents, anything personal." The old woman studied him carefully. "Why? You planning to take responsibility for her girls?" "Maybe. Depends on what I learn." Mrs. Peterson nodded slowly. "Margaret was a good woman, private but good. She worked hard, loved her daughters fiercely, and never complained about the way this town treated her." She glanced at Emma and Lily. "Girls, why don't you go see if any of your mama's things are still in your old room? Third door on the right upstairs." The girls hesitated, looking to Caleb for permission. He nodded, and they scurried off, clearly eager to see a place that had been home, however briefly. Once they were gone, Mrs. Peterson's expression turned serious. "Now then, what is it you really want to know? Did Margaret ever talk about the girl's father? Ever give you any hint about who he was?" "Not directly, Mrs. Peterson said. But I'm not blind, Mr. Stone. I saw the way she looked when she heard your name mentioned in town. I saw how she would find excuses to walk past the general store when you came in for supplies. She knew you." Caleb's chest tightened. "She never approached me." "No. And I asked her about it once, about why she didn't speak to you if she clearly wanted to. You know what she said?" Mrs. Peterson leaned forward. "She said you had enough grief in your life. Said she couldn't add to it. Said the past needed to stay buried for everyone's sake." "What past?" She wouldn't say. But a few times, when she had fever or had been working too late and her guard was down, she would talk. She mentioned a man named James. Said he was good and kind and burdened by guilt he didn't deserve. Said he died trying to find a way to come home. Caleb's hands trembled slightly. "James. My brother's name was James." "I know," Mrs. Peterson said quietly. "I figured that out eventually. Margaret never confirmed it, but the way she spoke about him, the timing, it all pointed one direction. If James was the father, if these girls are his daughters, then Margaret was what? Someone he met after the war? Before the war ended, I think, Mrs. Peterson said. She let slip once that he was running from something when they met, that he was trying to disappear but couldn't quite manage it. They fell in love, she got pregnant, and he left to find work and legitimacy. He was going to come back for her, make things right. But he never did. He died, Caleb said, died in a mining accident before he could return. That's what Margaret believed. She waited for him for months after the girls were born. When she finally accepted he wasn't coming back, she decided to look for his family. She knew he had a brother in Wyoming territory. Knew that brother had lost his own family and might understand loss better than most. She came here looking for me. She came here hoping you might help her daughters if anything happened to her. But when she saw your grief, saw how you'd isolated yourself, she couldn't bring herself to burden you. So she watched from a distance and kept her secret. Caleb stood abruptly and walked to the window, struggling with emotions he couldn't name. Margaret had been here for 7 years, raising his nieces alone, watching him from afar, protecting him from a truth she thought would hurt him more than help. She should have told me, he said roughly. Maybe, Mrs. Peterson agreed, but she did what she thought was right, and in the end, she made sure her girls would find you when they needed you most. By sending them into the wilderness to die, by trusting that you would be exactly where you were on Christmas morning, the old woman corrected gently. Margaret knew you, Mr. Stone, knew your heart, even if you'd never spoken. She knew you'd be at your cabin, and she knew you'd save her girls if you found them. She set it up that way. But Henderson was a tool, nothing more. Margaret made sure people knew about you before she died. Made sure it was mentioned that a mountain man lived alone in the hills. When Henderson decided to get rid of the girls, he chose the direction she had carefully planted in the town's collective mind. Mrs. Peterson smiled sadly. She was a clever woman, your brother's love. She played a long game to protect her daughters. Footsteps on the stairs announced the girls' return. They came into the room carrying a small wooden box, their faces bright with discovery. "Look what we found," Emma said. "It's Mama's special box. She kept her important things in it." Caleb took the box carefully. It was plain pine, handmade, with a simple latch. Inside, he found a collection of items, a few pressed flowers, a ribbon worn thin from handling, a thimble, and at the bottom, a sealed letter. The letter was addressed in careful script to Caleb Stone should he ever ask. Mrs. Peterson nodded toward it. "She left that with me a week before she died. Made me promise to give it to you if you ever came asking about her or the girls." Caleb's hands shook as he picked up the envelope. This was it, the truth he'd been seeking, written in Margaret's own hand. "Girls," he said quietly, "why don't you help Mrs. Peterson in the kitchen for a few minutes? I need to read this alone." They nodded solemnly and followed the old woman out, leaving Caleb alone with the letter and the weight of revelations yet to come. He broke the seal and began to read, and with each word, the pieces of a 7-year mystery fell into place. The letter was written in a delicate hand, the letters carefully formed as if Margaret had taken great care with every word. "Dear Caleb Stone, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and my daughters have found their way to you, as I prayed they would. I do not know if they told you about me, or if you have pieced together the truth on your own, but either way, you deserve to know the whole story. Not just for the girls' sake, but for James's sake. He loved you, Caleb, more than you may realize, and his last thoughts were of you and home. My name is Margaret Elizabeth Stone. I took your brother's name, though we never had the chance to marry proper. That is a scandal, I know, but I do not regret it. I loved James with everything I had, and he loved me the same. We met in the spring of 1868, in a small town in Kansas called Millbrook. I was working at a boarding house, much like Mrs. Peterson's. James came through on his way west, running from something, though he wouldn't say what. He looked haunted, Caleb. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world and no way to set it down. He stayed 2 weeks, paying for his room with work. We talked in the evenings, and slowly he opened up to me. He told me about the war, about the things he'd been ordered to do, about the innocents who died because of those orders. He told me about deserting, about the shame that ate at him, about how he couldn't face his family knowing what he'd done. I told him shame was a poor reason to stay hidden. I told him everyone makes choices they regret, and what matters is what comes after. I told him he could go home, face his brother, and find forgiveness. But he was convinced you would hate him for deserting. He said you were the honorable one, the one who always did right, and he couldn't bear to see disappointment in your eyes. So he decided to make something of himself first, to earn his way back to redemption before going home. We fell in love during those 2 weeks. I know that sounds impossible, but some things happen fast when they're meant to be. When he left, I cried for 3 days straight. Then I discovered I was carrying his children. James had told me where he was headed, to the silver mines in Colorado, to make enough money to start fresh. I sent a letter to every mining camp I could find the name of, but none of my letters ever found him. I waited and waited, growing larger with the twins, praying he would return. He never did. 2 months after Emma and Lily were born, I received word from a mine foreman. James had been killed in a collapse. The foreman said James talked about me in his final moments, said he had been planning to come back for me the following month, said he had saved enough to make a life together. He was going to find his brother after that, make amends, introduce us all properly. He died 2 weeks before he could come home. I was heartbroken, Caleb. But I had 2 babies to care for, and grief is a luxury the poor cannot afford. I knew James had a brother in Wyoming territory, knew he had spoken of you with love and regret. So I came here, hoping I don't know what I hoped for. Help, maybe. Understanding, a connection to the man I loved. But when I arrived in Redemption Ridge and heard the stories about you, about the wife and child you lost, about the grief that drove you into the mountains, I couldn't bring myself to burden you further. What right did I have to appear and say, your brother lived after all, and here are his children, and by the way, he died anyway? You had your own pain. You didn't need mine. So I stayed quiet. I raised Emma and Lily alone. I watched you from afar when you came to town, saw James in your face and your movements, and I kept my peace. I told myself it was better this way, that you deserved to live without the weight of James's choices and my mistakes. But now I am dying, and I cannot keep silent anymore. Emma and Lily are your nieces, Caleb. They are James's daughters, and that makes them your blood family. They are good girls, smart, kind, resilient. They deserve better than what this town has given them, better than what I could provide. I know asking you to take them is presumptuous. I know you chose isolation for reasons that are your own. But I also know that James loved you, and I believe some part of that love passed to his daughters. They carry his eyes, his stubborn spirit, his gentle heart. When you look at them, you are looking at pieces of your brother brought back to life. There is something else you should know. The resemblance between your Sarah and me is not coincidence. I never knew how to tell you this, never found the right time or words. But Sarah was my cousin, third cousin, distant enough that we never met, but family nonetheless. I learned this after I came here, after I saw her photograph in the general store where they kept a memorial. The resemblance startled me, so I asked around and pieced together her family tree. We shared great-grandparents on her mother's side. I like to think that's fate, Caleb. That James found someone who reminded him of the family he thought he'd lost forever. That the circle somehow completed itself, even though we were all too blind to see it at the time. My daughters do not know any of this. I could never find the words to explain. But they know about you, the man in the mountains, who understands loss, who knows how to survive alone. I have told them that if they ever need help and have nowhere else to turn, they should go to the mountains on Christmas morning, and the lonely man with the kind heart will save them. I pray I am right about you, Caleb. I pray that despite your grief and isolation, you will see Emma and Lily for what they are, innocent children who deserve love and stability and family. They are the last piece of James that exists in this world. Through them, he lives on. I do not ask you to love them immediately. I do not expect you to replace the daughter you lost. I only ask that you give them a chance, let them show you who they are. And if, over time, you come to care for them even a fraction of how their father would have, that will be enough. Thank you for reading this. Thank you for whatever kindness you have already shown them by virtue of them being alive and well enough to deliver them to this letter. And thank you, on behalf of James, for being the brother he loved, even when he could not face you. May you find peace, Caleb. May we all find peace, wherever we end up, with gratitude and hope. Margaret Elizabeth Stone. Caleb read the letter 3 times, each pass revealing new layers of meaning, new connections, new pain. James had lived, had loved, had tried to make his way back to honor, and had died before he could complete that journey. Emma and Lily were his nieces, his blood, the last living connection to a brother he had thought lost forever. And Margaret, dear God, Margaret had been Sarah's cousin, distant, yes, but family. That explained the resemblance, explained the uncanny similarity that had struck him so deeply. James had found and loved a woman who resembled the family he'd left behind, had created new family to replace the one he thought he'd lost. And then fate had taken him anyway, leaving his daughters to find their way to the uncle who never knew they existed. Caleb sat in the quiet sitting room, the letter clutched in his hands, and for the first time in 5 years he wept. Not the silent, stoic grief he had carried since Sarah's death, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place he thought had gone numb. He wept for James, for the brother who had carried shame unnecessarily, who had died trying to redeem himself for sins that Caleb would have forgiven in a heartbeat. He wept for Margaret, who had loved his brother and raised his children alone while watching from a distance, too selfless to burden him with truth. He wept for Sarah and Mary, for the family he had lost and thought he would never replace. And he wept for Emma and Lily, for 2 innocent girls who had been born into love and loss, who had been rejected and abandoned by people who should have protected them, who had walked through snow and darkness because their dying mother believed in a man she had never met. The door opened quietly. Mrs. Peterson stood in the doorway, the girls behind her, their faces worried. "Mr. Caleb," Emma said softly. Caleb wiped his eyes roughly and looked at them, really looked at them. Now that he knew what to see, it was obvious. Emma had James's stubborn chin and quick smile. Lily had his thoughtful eyes and quiet intensity. They both had his way of tilting their heads when listening carefully. They were family. They were blood. They were his. "Come here," he said, his voice rough. The girls approached cautiously. Caleb held out his arms, and after a moment's hesitation, they came to him. He pulled them close, holding them tight, feeling their small bodies relax against him. "You're my nieces," he said quietly. "Your father was my brother, James. He loved your mother very much, and he would have loved you beyond measure if he'd lived long enough to meet you." Emma pulled back to look at his face. "Your brother was our papa." "Yes. Does that mean we're really your family?" Lily asked, her voice trembling with hope and disbelief. "Yes," Caleb said firmly. "You are my family, my brother's daughters, and that means you're not alone anymore. Do you understand? You have family now." Both girls began to cry, not from sadness, but from relief, from the overwhelming realization that they belonged somewhere, to someone. They clung to Caleb, and he held them, and in that moment something fundamental shifted in his heart. For 5 years he had been frozen, locked in grief, refusing to let anyone or anything matter. But these girls, these small, brave, resilient girls, had thawed something essential. They had brought him back to life, not through force, but through need, through their simple existence as the last living pieces of his brother. Mrs. Peterson smiled from the doorway, tears on her own cheeks. "Margaret knew," she said softly. "She knew you'd come through for them." Caleb nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He held his nieces close and made a silent promise to James, to Margaret, to Sarah, and to himself. He would not fail these girls. He would give them the home, the love, and the family they deserved. Some choices change everything. This revelation had changed not just his understanding of the past, but his vision of the future. Emma and Lily were his family now, and he would move heaven and earth to keep them safe and give them the life their parents had dreamed of but never got to provide. The past was written. The pain was real. But the future was still being carved. And Caleb Stone was determined to make it better for these two small girls who had been entrusted to his care. The revelation changed everything, but it solved nothing. Emma and Lily were his family by blood, but legally they belonged to no one, orphans of the territory, wards of the county, subject to the decisions of men who saw them as burdens rather than blessings. Caleb understood this within minutes of leaving Mrs. Peterson's boarding house. As he walked back to the sheriff's office with the girls, he saw Jacob Henderson standing on the steps of the general store, watching them with cold calculation. The man's expression held no shame, no regret for what he had done, only irritation that his problem had returned. "We need to make this legal," Caleb told Sheriff Hastings when they reached the office. "I need to formally adopt these girls. They're my blood family, and I won't risk someone taking them from me." Tom leaned back in his chair, his expression troubled. "Adoption requires approval from the town council. They meet day after tomorrow. You'll need to petition them, state your case, and they'll vote on whether to grant you custody." "That should be simple enough," Caleb said. "These are my nieces. I have Margaret's letter proving it. I have the means to care for them. What's there to debate?" "You'd be surprised," Tom said dryly. "The council isn't always motivated by logic or justice. Henderson is on that council. So is Alderman Briggs, who owns the bank and doesn't approve of mountain men. Pastor Mitchell is on it too, and he'll support you. But he's only one vote out of 5. Who are the other 2? Mrs. Dorothy Walsh, who runs the general store, and Frank Cooper, who owns the lumber mill. Both are decent people, but both are also influenced by town opinion. If Henderson can make you look unfit, they might side with him." Caleb felt his jaw tighten. "Unfit how?" "I have a home, income, and now proven family connection." "You live alone in the mountains," Tom pointed out. "You have no wife to provide maternal care. You're known for being a recluse. Henderson will argue that children need proper social upbringing, church attendance, schooling, things you can't provide in isolation." "I can provide safety and love," Caleb countered. "More than this town ever gave them." "I agree with you," Tom said, "but I'm not the one you need to convince. The council meets Thursday morning. That gives you 2 days to build your case and gather support. You'll need character witnesses, evidence of your fitness as a guardian, and probably a plan for how you'll raise them." Caleb nodded slowly, his mind already working through the possibilities. "I'll need to talk to Pastor Mitchell. And Mrs. Peterson. Who else might support me?" "Jacob Brenner might," Tom suggested. "He's a rancher, knew you before Sarah died. He's respected in the community. If he vouches for you, that carries weight." "Anyone else?" "Get as many as you can," Tom advised. "The more people who speak for you, the harder it is for Henderson to paint you as a dangerous hermit." Caleb spent the rest of that day calling on people he hadn't spoken to in years. Some received him warmly, remembering the man he used to be before grief drove him into isolation. Others were wary, uncertain whether the mountain recluse was fit to raise children. Pastor Mitchell was the first person he visited, bringing the girls along so they wouldn't be left alone. The pastor was a kind man in his 60s, weathered by years of trying to shepherd a flock that often resisted his gentler instincts. "Caleb Stone," the pastor said, opening his door wide. Come in, and you've brought Margaret's girls." They sat in the pastor's modest parlour, and Caleb explained everything: the letter, the family connection, his intention to adopt. Pastor Mitchell listened carefully, his expression growing more troubled as the story unfolded. "I suspected there was a connection," the pastor said when Caleb finished. "Margaret used to come to church sometimes, and I saw how she watched you when you came to town. She never said anything, but I could see the longing in her face." "Will you speak for me at the council meeting?" Caleb asked. "Of course," the pastor said immediately. "These girls need family, and you're their family. That should be the end of the discussion." He paused. "But I'll warn you, Henderson won't make this easy. He's embarrassed that his cruelty has been exposed, and embarrassed men often become vindictive." "Let him try," Caleb said grimly. "I'm not backing down." The pastor smiled slightly. "Good. These girls need someone who won't back down. They've had enough people give up on them." Next, Caleb visited Jacob Brenner's ranch. Jacob was a few years older than Caleb, a solid man with a large family and a reputation for fairness. They had worked together on occasion before Sarah's death, and Jacob had been one of the few people who tried to maintain contact after Caleb retreated to the mountains. "Heard you came back with some extra cargo," Jacob said when Caleb arrived. "Heard they're your kin." "My brother's daughters," Caleb confirmed. He explained the situation once more, and Jacob listened with the careful attention of a man who understood that words mattered. "I'll speak for you," Jacob said when Caleb finished. "You're a good man, Caleb, even if grief made you hard to reach for a while. Any man who'd take in his brother's children is doing right by family, and that's what matters most. Henderson will argue I'm unfit because I live alone." "Henderson is a hypocrite and a coward," Jacob said bluntly. "He talks about Christian charity while throwing children out into blizzards. Anyone with eyes can see which of you is the better man." He paused. "Bring the girls by tomorrow. Let my wife meet them. We'll stand with you at the council meeting." By evening, Caleb had secured promises from 5 people to speak on his behalf. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was something. He took the girls back to Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, where the old woman insisted they stay rather than making the long journey back to the cabin. "You need to be in town for the meeting," she said practically, "and the girls need rest. I'll not charge you for the rooms. Consider it my contribution to the cause." That night, Caleb lay awake in the small room Mrs. Peterson had given him, listening to the sounds of the town outside his window. He wasn't used to so much noise, the creaking of wagons, the distant sound of voices, the barking of dogs. It all felt foreign after 5 years of mountain silence. But in the room next to his, Emma and Lily slept peacefully, and that made every discomfort worthwhile. The next day, Thursday morning, arrived too quickly. Caleb dressed carefully in his best clothes, which weren't particularly impressive, but they were clean and mended. He helped the girls dress in simple dresses Mrs. Peterson had found for them, brushed their hair, and tried to calm their obvious nervousness. "What if they say we can't stay with you?" Emma asked, her voice small and frightened. "Then we'll find another way," Caleb said firmly. "I'm not giving up on you, ever. Do you understand?" Both girls nodded, but their fear remained visible. They had learned not to trust in positive outcomes, not to hope too hard, lest that hope be crushed. The council meeting was held in the town hall, a plain wooden building that served multiple purposes depending on the day. When Caleb arrived with the girls, he found the room already filling with townspeople. Apparently, word had spread about the adoption petition, and folks were curious to see how it would play out. The council members sat at a long table at the front of the room. Pastor Mitchell offered Caleb an encouraging nod. Henderson stared at him with undisguised hostility. The others, Mrs. Walsh, Mr. Cooper, and Alderman Briggs, wore neutral expressions that revealed nothing of their thoughts. "This meeting is called to order," Alderman Briggs announced. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and the bearing of someone who took his responsibilities very seriously. "We are here to consider a petition for adoption filed by Caleb Stone regarding the minors Emma and Lily, currently wards of the territory." "Mr. Stone," Briggs continued, "please present your case." Caleb stood, acutely aware of all the eyes on him. Public speaking had never been his strength, but he had learned in the war that conviction could make up for eloquence. "My name is Caleb Stone," he began. "I'm here to petition for the right to adopt Emma and Lily Stone. They are not strangers to me. They are my brother James's daughters, my nieces. I have proof of this relationship in a letter written by their mother before she died." He held up Margaret's letter. "Their mother, Margaret Stone, was in a common-law marriage with my brother. When he died before they could make it legal, she came to this territory hoping to connect with his family. She kept silent about the relationship out of respect for my grief over losing my own wife and child. But before she died, she made certain her daughters would find me." "This is convenient," Henderson interrupted. "A dead woman's letter that conveniently proves exactly what you need it to prove." "Margaret Stone was a woman of integrity," Pastor Mitchell said sharply. "Her word should not be questioned simply because she cannot defend it herself." "Nevertheless," Henderson continued, "even if we accept that these girls are Mr. Stone's nieces, that doesn't automatically make him a fit guardian. He lives alone in the mountains, miles from civilization. These children need proper upbringing, school, church, social interaction with other children. They need a mother's care. They need love and safety," Caleb countered, "which this town failed to provide. They were passed from house to house like unwanted goods, and you, Mr. Henderson, put them out in a blizzard to die." The room erupted in whispers. Henderson's face darkened. "That's a damned lie." "It's the truth," Caleb said coldly. "These girls told me exactly what you did. You drove them into the wilderness and abandoned them. If I hadn't found them, they would have frozen to death." "Mr. Stone," Alderman Briggs said sharply, "accusations of attempted murder are serious. Do you have proof?" "I have the testimony of 2 witnesses, the girls themselves." "The unreliable testimony of children who have been coached," Henderson shot back. "Who have every reason to lie, to gain sympathy. They're 6 years old," Caleb said, his voice rising. "They nearly died. What possible reason would they have to lie about that?" "Order," Briggs said, rapping his knuckles on the table. "This is getting us nowhere. Mr. Stone, do you have witnesses to speak to your character and fitness as a guardian?" "I do." Over the next hour, Pastor Mitchell, Mrs. Peterson, Jacob Brenner, and 3 others spoke on Caleb's behalf. They testified to his integrity, his capability, his devotion to family. Jacob brought his wife, who spoke movingly about how the girls had played with her children the previous day, how they were polite and sweet and desperately in need of stability. "Children don't need perfection," Mrs. Brenner said. "They need someone who won't give up on them. Mr. Stone has already proven he's that person." But Henderson had his own witnesses. 3 church members testified that children needed proper Christian upbringing in a community setting. 2 spoke vaguely about concerns over Caleb's isolation and temperament. One suggested delicately that a man who had retreated from society after loss might not be mentally fit to raise children. The arguments went on for 2 hours. Back and forth, support and opposition, until finally Alderman Briggs called for quiet. "We will now vote," he said, "all in favor of granting Mr. Stone custody and adoption rights." Pastor Mitchell's hand went up immediately. A moment later, Mrs. Walsh raised hers, then Frank Cooper. 3 votes. Caleb held his breath. "All opposed?" Henderson's hand shot up. Alderman Briggs hesitated, then slowly raised his own. 3-2. Caleb had won, but just barely. "The petition is approved," Briggs announced. Custody of Emma and Lily Stone is granted to Caleb Stone, with adoption proceedings to be finalized within 30 days. The room erupted in noise, some applause, some angry muttering. Henderson stood abruptly and stormed out without a word. Caleb barely noticed. He was looking at Emma and Lily, who stood frozen, not quite believing what had just happened. "Did we win?" Emma whispered. "We won," Caleb confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "You're mine now, officially. Nobody can take you away." Both girls burst into tears and ran to him. He caught them, held them close, and let them cry. Around them, people began to leave, some stopping to offer congratulations, others leaving in silence. Pastor Mitchell approached and put a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "Take them home," he said quietly. "Take them home and give them the life they deserve." Caleb nodded, too overcome to speak. He had won the battle, but he knew the war wasn't over. Henderson's face as he left had promised trouble. The narrow margin of victory suggested the town remained divided. But none of that mattered right now. Right now he had his nieces, legally and forever. Right now he had family again, and that was worth any fight that might come. The day Judge Matthews arrived, the town hall was packed. Word had spread about the custody challenge, and it seemed half of Redemption Ridge wanted to witness the outcome. Caleb sat at the front with Emma and Lily on either side of him, their small hands gripping his tightly. Judge Matthews was an imposing figure, tall, white-haired, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He had a reputation for fairness, but also for strict adherence to law over sentiment. Caleb had learned this from Tom Hastings, who had dealt with the judge on previous circuits. "This court is convened to review the custody arrangement of minors Emma and Lily Stone," Matthews announced. His voice carried authority that silenced the murmuring crowd instantly. "Mr. Henderson, you filed the challenge. Present your case." Henderson stood, straightening his jacket with self-importance. "Your Honor, I challenge Mr. Stone's fitness as a guardian on several grounds. First, he lives in isolation, miles from any community or support. Second, he has no experience raising children and no wife to provide maternal guidance. Third, these girls require education, religious instruction, and social development that cannot be provided in a remote mountain cabin. These are serious concerns," the judge acknowledged. "Mr. Stone, how do you respond?" Caleb stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. "Your Honor, I am these girls' uncle by blood. Their father was my brother James, and their mother was a distant cousin to my late wife. Family ties bind us together stronger than any court arrangement." "Family connection is noted," Matthews said, "but Mr. Henderson's concerns about practical matters remain. How do you intend to provide for these children's education and upbringing?" This was the moment Caleb had been dreading. "I'm prepared to relocate, Your Honor, to move closer to town where the girls can attend school. I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary to give them stability and opportunity." Henderson scoffed. "A mountain man playing at domestication. How long before he retreats to his isolation again, leaving these children with even more abandonment to bear?" "That won't happen," Caleb said firmly. "You can't know that," Henderson shot back. "You've spent 5 years avoiding people, avoiding responsibility. Why should anyone believe you'll change now?" Before Caleb could answer, a small voice spoke up. "Because he promised." Everyone turned. Emma had stood up, her face pale but determined. Beside her, Lily rose as well, clutching the red ribbon their mother had given them. "Young lady," Judge Matthews said, not unkindly, "this is not the time." "Please, sir," Emma interrupted, her voice shaking but clear. "Please let us talk. We're the ones everyone's deciding about." "Don't we get to say something?" The judge studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. Approach the bench." Both girls walked forward, still holding hands. Caleb started to follow, but Matthews gestured for him to remain seated. The girls stood before the judge, small and vulnerable, yet somehow brave. "What would you like to tell me?" Matthews asked gently. Mr. Caleb saved our lives, Emma said. Mr. Henderson put us out in the snow on Christmas Eve. He drove us far away and told us to walk, said God would provide if we deserved to live. We walked for hours in the dark and cold. Lily collapsed. I thought we were going to die. That's a serious accusation, Matthews said, looking at Henderson, whose face had gone red. It's the truth, Lily added quietly. We was so cold we couldn't feel our feet. Then Emma saw a light through the trees. We walked toward it and found Mr. Caleb's cabin. He saved us. He warmed us, doctored our feet, gave us food and kindness. And he didn't have to, Emma continued. He lives alone because he's sad, because his own little girl died and it broke his heart. But he helped us anyway. And when he found out we were his family, that our papa was his brother, he cried. He cried because he thought his brother was dead, but we brought him back a little bit. Tears were streaming down Emma's face now, but she kept talking. Everyone else gave up on us. Everyone said we was cursed, that we brought bad luck. But Mr. Caleb said that was wrong. He said we was just children who deserved love. He made us a wooden horse and told us stories and promised he wouldn't leave us. And he keeps his promises, Lily said. He said he'd stay with us during the storm, and he did. He said he'd find out about our mama, and he did. He said he'd fight for us, and he is. Nobody ever fought for us before. Emma held up the red ribbon. Our mama gave us this. She said it would lead us to someone who would save us. She was right. She led us to Mr. Caleb. And if you take us away from him, you're saying our mama was wrong. You're saying she should have just let us die instead. The room was completely silent. Judge Matthews looked at the girls, then at Caleb, then at Henderson, whose face had gone from red to pale. Mr. Henderson, the judge said slowly, did you abandon these children in the wilderness? They were unmanageable. I couldn't. Answer the question. Did you put them out in dangerous conditions and leave them? Henderson's silence was damning. Judge Matthews's expression hardened. I've heard enough. The original custody decision stands. Emma and Lily Stone will remain with their uncle, Caleb Stone. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into Mr. Henderson's actions. If these allegations prove true, charges will be filed. Henderson stood abruptly. This is outrageous. You're taking the word of children over a man who refuses to deny abandoning them? Matthews interrupted coldly. Get out of my courtroom, Mr. Henderson. Consider yourself fortunate I'm not holding you in contempt. Henderson fled, and the room erupted in whispers and scattered applause. Emma and Lily ran back to Caleb, who caught them in his arms, holding them tight. Judge Matthews rapped for order. Mr. Stone, this court recognizes your custody. I expect you to honor your commitment to these children's welfare and education. Don't make me regret this decision. You won't. Your Honor, Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion. I promise you won't. As they left the courthouse, people stopped to congratulate them. Some who had avoided Caleb before now offered support. The tide had turned, not completely, but enough. They had won. Not just the legal battle, but something more important. They had proven they were a family worth fighting for. Spring came to the Wyoming Territory with the kind of gentle insistence that made winter seem like a distant memory. Snow melted from the valleys first, then gradually retreated up the mountainsides, leaving behind carpets of wildflowers and new grass. The world came back to life, and so did Caleb Stone. He stood on the porch of his new home, a modest house on the outskirts of Redemption Ridge, close enough to town for the girls to attend school, but far enough to maintain some of the peace he craved. The cabin in the mountains remained his, a place he visited occasionally to check trap lines and remember, but it was no longer his home. Home was here, where Emma and Lily's laughter filled rooms that had stood empty for too long. Inside, he could hear the girls getting ready for school. 3 months had passed since the adoption was finalized, and they had settled into routines that felt almost normal. Emma was thriving in her studies, her quick mind soaking up reading and arithmetic with enthusiasm. Lily was quieter but just as capable, showing a talent for drawing that the schoolteacher encouraged. They had friends now, other children who had learned to look past the stigma of their birth and see them for who they were. The Brenner children visited often. Even some of the families who had initially been cold had warmed, especially after Henderson left town, rather than face charges for abandonment. "Uncle Caleb," Emma called from inside. "We're going to be late." Caleb smiled. Uncle Caleb. The title still felt new, still carried weight and wonder. He had been alone for so long that being needed, being essential to someone else's life, felt like learning to walk again after years of sitting still. He went inside to find both girls dressed in simple but clean dresses, their hair braided neatly. They looked healthy now, their cheeks had color, their eyes sparkled with life instead of weariness. The scared, half-frozen children he had found in the snow had transformed into vibrant young girls with futures ahead of them. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," they chorused. They walked to school together, as they did every morning. It was a 20-minute walk, and Caleb used the time to talk with them, to hear about their concerns and excitements, to remind them they were loved and valued. These morning walks had become sacred time, a daily affirmation of their bond. At the schoolhouse, other children greeted Emma and Lily warmly. The teacher, Miss Sarah, the name, still gave Caleb a pang, but a sweet one waved to him. "Mr. Stone, could I speak with you briefly?" Caleb approached while the girls went inside with their friends. Miss Sarah smiled at him, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a gentle manner. "I wanted to tell you that Emma and Lily are doing wonderfully," she said. "They're both bright students, but more than that, they're kind. They help other children who struggle. They share what they have. You should be very proud of them." "I am," Caleb said simply. "I also wanted to ask, we're doing a program in 2 weeks where students share stories about their families. Would you be willing to come and speak about your brother? I think it would mean a great deal to the girls to have you there." The old Caleb would have refused immediately, uncomfortable with public attention and painful memories. But he wasn't that man anymore. "I'd be honored," he said. Walking back through town, Caleb stopped at the general store. Mrs. Walsh greeted him warmly now, and they talked easily about supplies and weather and small things that made up daily life. It felt strange to be part of a community again, but not wrong, just different from what he had known in his years of isolation. At Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, he found the old woman tending her garden, coaxing early spring vegetables from the still cool soil. "Morning, Caleb," she said, straightening slowly. "How are my girls?" "Thriving," Caleb said. "Thanks to you." "Thanks to you," she corrected. "I just pointed you in the right direction. You did the hard work of opening your heart again." They talked for a while about the girls, about the garden, about life's small pleasures. Before leaving, Caleb handed her an envelope. "What's this?" Mrs. Peterson asked. "Payment for the rooms, and a little extra for all your help. I told you. I don't want—" "I know what you told me," Caleb interrupted gently. "But you helped save 3 lives, Mrs. Peterson, mine and the girls. That deserves more than thanks." He left before she could argue further, but he saw the tears in her eyes and knew she understood. That afternoon, Caleb rode up to the mountain cabin, something he did once a week to maintain the place and check the traplines he still ran occasionally. The cabin stood exactly as he'd left it, quiet and solid. He went inside and found it just as he remembered, sparse, functional, lonely. Sarah's Bible still sat on the table. He picked it up and carried it outside, settling on the porch to read as the afternoon sun warmed the clearing. He read passages Sarah had marked, remembered her voice speaking the words, and felt peace rather than pain. A new Bible sat on the table at the house in town, one he had purchased and inscribed with 3 names, Caleb Stone, Emma Stone, Lily Stone. They read from it together at night sometimes. The girls asking questions, him doing his best to answer. They were building new traditions, new memories, a new family from the pieces of old ones. As the sun began to set, Caleb closed the Bible and looked out over the mountains. Somewhere out there, James had walked these same trails, carrying his own burdens of shame and regret. Somewhere out there, Margaret had made the long journey, hoping to find family for her daughters. Their paths had been hard, their lives cut too short, but their love had endured. Through Emma and Lily, James and Margaret lived on. Their goodness, their hope, their determination to do right by the ones they loved, all of it continued in two small girls who were learning that the world, though sometimes cruel, could also be kind. Caleb thought about the night he found them, about the choice he made to help rather than turn away. Sheriff Hastings had been right, some choices change everything. That choice had changed him from a man slowly dying of loneliness into a father figure who had reasons to live, to hope, to love again. He packed up and rode back down the mountain as darkness fell. Lights glowed in the windows of his house, and through them he could see Emma and Lily setting the table for dinner, their movements synchronized in the way of twins who share an unbreakable bond. Home, Caleb thought. This is home now. He dismounted, tended to his horse, and went inside to his family. The girls ran to greet him with hugs and chatter about their day. He listened, laughed, held them close. Later, after dinner and evening chores, after stories and prayers and good nights, Caleb sat alone in the quiet house and marveled at how full his life had become. The isolation he had craved for 5 years now seemed like a kind of death, a slow surrender to grief. These girls had pulled him back from that edge, reminded him that life, real life, required connection, required vulnerability, required love. On the mantel sat a collection of objects that told their story. The wooden horse he had carved, the red ribbon Margaret had given her daughters, the photograph that had revealed the truth, and a new addition, a family portrait taken just last week, the three of them standing together, unsmiling in the formal way of photographs, but radiating warmth nonetheless. Some choices change everything. That Christmas morning, Caleb had made a choice that saved 2 lives. What he hadn't realized until much later was that the same choice had saved his life too. Outside, spring continued its patient work of renewal. Inside, a family forged from loss and sealed by love settled into the comfortable rhythms of life together. And in the mountains above, snow still capped the highest peaks, eternal and unchanging. But in the valley below, change had come, and it was good